Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Um, I'd like to welcome us all to the event today. Thank you for waiting a little bit with us, and we're really sorry for the late start. This is the graduate seminar series of the African Studies Department. My name is Chidinma Chidoka. Um, I will kind of like shepherd today's event. We're very excited to have you all here. The graduate seminar series was conceptualized by our cohorts led by Yaw, who's going to be presenting today. And we're very excited, we're proud of him, and we're proud of what we have done so far. This is the second in the series. He's going to be speaking on an African cosmological thoughts. But I'd like to begin by introducing the chair of today's event. His name is Professor Mario Beatty, and I'll just take a few short minutes to read a little bit of his bio. So Professor Beatty is an associate professor of Afro-American Studies, and he received his BA in Black World Studies at Miami University, Oxford, Ohio. His MA in Black Studies at the Ohio State University, and his PhD in African American Studies at Temple University. He has taught at the Morris Brown College, Bowie State University, and he has served as the chairperson of the Department of African American Studies at the Chicago State University from 2007 to 2010. From 2004 to 2007, he served as an educational consultant for the School District of Philadelphia, where he helped write curriculum and to train teachers in the novel district-wide mandatory course in African American history. He currently serves as president of the Association for the Study of
Classical African civilizations.
Oh, I'm sorry. Classical African civilizations. And I guess it includes ancient Egyptian language, history, wisdom, literature, astronomy in ancient Egyptian religious texts, comparative analysis of African cultures, the image and use of ancient Africa in the African American historical imagination, the theory and practice of African American studies, and Pan-Africanism. Professor Beatty, we're happy to have you here, and we know that you're going to do an amazing intro for Yaw and lead us into this exciting seminar series. Welcome.
Thank you very much. This is going to be captured, right? Yeah. Yes. Where's the camera at?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all, and I want to welcome you all to this graduate seminar series. But first, before I begin my comments, I want to thank the Department of African Studies for supporting such an innovative, creative, and bold initiative for just stellar graduate students at Howard University in this area. This is a very, very important initiative. And now I've just heard that Yaw Asare, who I'm introducing today, has actually spearheaded this particular initiative. An initiative like this, I wish I had this as a graduate student, because the initiative is extremely important. And a couple of weeks ago, we had another scholar in African Studies, a PhD student, named Dawit Mulune, who presented to us on the Miracles of Mary text in Ethiopia. And that was a phenomenal presentation a couple of weeks ago. And it shows the type of scholarship, the type of precision that is a part of this graduate graduate student cohort here in African Studies. But more importantly, it shows something that is being emphasized at Howard University in terms of African studies that I think makes this place very unique and very special. And that is the power of African languages. When you come to Howard University has a wide array of African languages being taught at the highest level in their African languages program, really attached. And it is something very unique that there is really only a few places that you can even get this type of training anywhere in the United States, and I dare say in the African world. And Howard, this Department of African Studies is on the forefront of those types of initiatives, and it is really a pioneer in terms of these initiatives. And it makes it extra special because language carries culture. And in my dissertation, I was taught by, I think, probably the greatest of teachers of African languages and linguistics on the continent of Africa, a scholar by the name of Theophile Obenga. And I had a great honor of being his student and being trained by him for 3 years. And Obenga, in 1973, Obenga wrote a book called L'Afrique dans l'Antiquité, Africa in Antiquity. And as a part of this book, Obenga has a whole section on the importance of African graphic systems all over the African continent. But unfortunately, he didn't get to the Adinkra symbols that Yaw is going to be talking about today. But the importance of these graphic systems on the continent are extremely critical to understand. And what Yaw Asare is going to be bringing to us today is giving us a lens of how to contextualize the importance of these symbols. Because many things, many ideas, and many meanings of things get lost in translation. And so in order to unpack and to unravel the complexity of meanings means that we have to situate these symbols within a cosmological context, within a cultural context, within a societal context, and to try to discern and ascertain as best as we can the meanings that the people understudied, the meanings that they attached to these symbols, what it meant for them. And I dare say, perhaps there is no more important Adinkra symbol than Gye Nyame. And that is the examination that Yaw Asare is going to bring us today. And Yaw was born and bred in what is now known as Ghana, with Tree as his first language, with an insatiable passion for learning through travel, Yaw has sojourned all over West Africa and some parts of North America. He also worked in the Office of Diaspora Affairs under the Office of the President in Ghana. Yaw earned a master's degree in African Studies from the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, and he is currently, of course, matriculating as a PhD student in African Studies at Howard University's Department of African Studies with a dissertation focus on Ghana's diaspora engagement policy. He's also interested in language as a liberation tool and a window into African deep thought. And he continues to study Akan tree and is currently the Akan tree lecturer right here at Howard University. So it is my great honor to welcome you, an emerging scholar that we will be hearing from for decades because of his mastery and expertise in this area. So it is my great honor to bring to you Brother Yaw Asare, who is going to talk to us on Gye Nyame.
Thank you, Dr. Beatty, for such a kind introduction. I'm very honored by your words. I keep saying that back home in Ghana, in the master's program that I was in, a small group of us, we tried to study the lecture, and Dr. Beatty was one of the references. Like, we just read this text, trying to understand what we're doing. So it feels like really, I don't know, it feels like coming full circle, being in Howard and also talking about Gye Nyame and Adinkra symbol and having you be the seminar chair. So thank you so much. And with that being said, also I welcome all of you to this presentation titled Gye Nyame, an African Cosmological Thought. I've been thinking a lot about Gye Nyame, especially when I started teaching tree in 2019. As part of as part of teaching tree, I would usually close the class, we'll look at either a proverb or an Adinkra, and we'll try to delve into it. And whenever we got to Gye Nyame, especially, we would ask okay, what is Gye Nyame? And then people would, it's very common to hear only God except God, people liken it to God. I'm okay, but where in the symbol and where in the proverb, do we hear, is there God? Where is God inside of this? So it led me to actually, really think about this symbol, but not just this symbol, a host of other symbols. I've been thinking through them because many times these symbols have been Christianized, anglicized, baptized, and we lose the depth of their meaning. So today we'll be talking about Gye Nyame. Specifically, I put African into, it's an Akan symbol, but I put it, I contextualize that within, African cosmological thoughts. Also because this is not just a window into Akan thought, but also a window into African thought as a whole. So we'll be doing a sense of comparative analysis to get, to actually have a more profound idea of what the symbol is. And also why is it a cosmological thought? Cosmological because it very much relates to the nature, the origin and nature of this universe as a whole. So I think it's very important to situate it as one that is cosmological. And also why thoughts? Thoughts because usually people tend to use philosophy. I prefer thoughts, which I feel it's more in sync with our Akan thoughts, because in Akan, when we say thoughts, we say adrenaline, and adrenaline is is at one time it is an abstract mental like facility, but at the same time too, it's very much a physical organism. So this becomes, it's like a praxis of the physical as well as like the abstract. So with that being said, but let me ask, how many of us have heard of Gye Nyame? Okay, yeah, quite. Okay, so we'll be delving into, so yeah, in this presentation, I mean, I'll look at like Adinkra, the use and functions of it. Would then delve into the Gye Nyame, the symbol and also the proverb associated with it. And I would also want us to talk about, you know, is Nyame equals God? Like, if Nyame equals God, okay, we'll talk about that. But then again, who or what is Nyame? And we'd also delve into the concept of Iradi Nyankopon, which have all been categorized under the concept of God. Then I would also discuss the implications of the equal to sign, as well as talk about like a theory to explain, you know, this equal to sign phenomena inside of African scholarship. And would also briefly discuss the relevant and have like concluding thoughts, as well as, you know, have questions and inputs from you all. So when we speak of like Adinkra, basically what we are speaking of is, you know, ideograms and pictographs. So these are like signs and symbols, and basically they allow for a meaningful and orderly interaction with a socially constructed reality by the Akans. Many times people will say, well, it's a social construction, but actually like everything is a social construction. What I find really interesting about, you know, like African social construction is that it's in alignment with everything in the universe. Like we try to construct society in alignment with the cosmos, like what is happening, you know. With God, they say as above, so below. So we are trying to align ourselves with like everything else. And Adinkra originally, as said, you know, they were imprinted in cloth, like what we are, you know, what I'm wearing. And they become like really powerful expressive mediums for communicating as well. Let me minimize this so I can see my notes. Yeah, so Adinkra also provides an expressive medium and writing system to communicate Akan thoughts. So what we see on the screen is the Asante when he was here in the US. That was some time last year. And as he walks, like he doesn't speak, but his cloth is speaking. So can anybody share with us what signs or symbols we are seeing in his cloth? Right. Yeah, so Sikedra Kofi, which is the golden stool. Why is this like, you know, embedded in his cloth here? Because he came for like a deba. There was actually a deba, and during such an important time, it is customary to have the Sikedra Kofi, which is said to be the crowd, the soul of the Asante people, you know, come out with him. But because he's here in the US and that couldn't be done, this is embedded in his cloth also to show that, you know, he is the custodian of the golden stool, which is the soul of the Asante people. And there is also a second symbol. Any ideas? Right here. So this is known as Asante Kotoko, which is the Asante porcupine. If you kill 1,000 more will come. So as Otumfo like parades the streets of, was it Memphis? Yes, like parades. He's actually speaking to his people that, yeah, like you know, the Asantes are like the porcupine. You kill 1,000 of us, 1,000 more will come. But speaking to how dense, you know, the Asante people are, that even in the US, he has like a whole crowd, a whole, we'll say, dom, you know, following him or being with him. So that's like some of the expressive mediums that, you know, we use our plots to speak. And also like the Adinkra becomes like a potent form of encoding complex concepts. So we are seeing like complex in his cloth, which are, you know, it's like being encoded, and if you know like the patterns or if you know the symbols, you know, you'll be able to understand. And what's also very important to note is that each Adinkra works with a proverbial complement. So every symbol you see has a proverb associated with it. But what's happening now is that, these proverbs are being shortened, and as I mentioned, baptized, anglicized, and then we are losing, those proverbs. So I already mentioned is Wukuma Pema Pembeba, which is the Adinkra in its cloth below. So also Adinkra becomes like messages in lieu of the spoken word. We had this footballer, Beatty, I think he plays for Barcelona. He also visited Ghana sometime last year, and as someone coming from the diaspora, he went to visit the Asante Hine. And inside of the Asante Hine's cloth, you see a rendition of this symbol, which is known as Funtum Funefu Denchem Funefu. These are the crocodiles with their stomachs tied up. So even just sitting there, Otumfo is like speaking to the connectedness of the motherland and the diaspora. If you know that symbol, it's the symbol says Funtum Funefu Denchem Funefu. Their stomachs are tied together. So these are two Siamese crocodiles with their stomachs tied together. But when they eat, they fight. But it speaks to like having that togetherness, when there is like a shared purpose, a shared heritage, a shared goal. So even just sitting, before he said anything, his cloth is already speaking. Do we know this symbol? I was going to animate this, so at least we have this first. But anyways, as we see, which is the logo for the Center for African Studies, which speaks to the importance of learning. So if you don't know when you learn, you come to knowledge. So these are also ways that Adinkra symbols are being used in today's times, whereby we see them as like logos. Another is Nyansapo, which is Nananum Nyansapo Yesaneno Badrema. So it takes the wise to untie the wisdom knot of the ancestors, speaking to like, you have to be like a profound person, you have to be deep, wise to be able to know what the ancestors are saying. Also in contemporary usage, it's very interesting to find out that like theoretical physicists are using, the Adinkra concept to encode formulae or equations. Basically, they are looking at like what the Akans are doing. Okay, so how then do we encode, equations in such a way that when you see these geometric symbols, you know which equation we are talking about. So this has been propagated by these two scholars, especially Fo and Gates, and they mention that the use of symbols connotes ideas which defy simple verbalization, and it's perhaps one of the oldest human traditions. The Asante people of West Africa have long been accustomed to using simple yet elegant motifs known as Adinkra symbols to serve just this purpose. With a nod to this tradition, we christen our graphical symbols as Adinkras. So here's a case whereby they are, using symbols which they actually term as Adinkra to encode like equation. And I think this is like a real challenge to us also as like, even scholars in like African studies, by extension, African American studies and all other fields, to look at like how we meaningfully like encode, like be it theories, be it thoughts, in symbols that our people could eventually understand. So now we come to the Gye Nyame symbol itself. In our tree class, we posed this question out, like folks should go and ask whoever, what Gye Nyame is. And we had like over 90% of the class coming back, talking about, it means like, the omnipotence of God, the supremacy of God, the something of Jesus, and like, and it was quite interesting. So we are like, okay, let's delve into, what this symbol actually says. So for us to like fully, like, embrace or come to an understanding of it, we have to go to the proverb. And the proverb associated with this says, Abodia Santa Ifritete, Obi ntiase onim na shase, na obi ntinase nkosi na wieye, Gye Nyame. Which is to say, the great panorama of creation is from the beginning of time, or ancient of days. None living knows its beginning, and none will live to see its end. Only Nyame. So then a question is like, what is this saying? Like, wait, what do you mean? You know? So let me throw this into like the crowd and then get like, what do we think is being said here? What are some thoughts? Anybody?
It's about humility.
Humility. Okay. Mm-hmm.
The omniscience, omnipresence, overall presence of God, that He cannot be measured.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Things are much bigger than you.
Things are
Much bigger than you.
Things are much bigger than you. Okay. Okay. Next.
Maybe human knowledge is limited. So if you want to expand your knowledge to align with the cosmos, you have to align yourself with Yahweh.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so these are, I really appreciate like all of your interpretations, but let's like break these down to see what we get from it. So the first line, I've also broken these down, like Abodie Santan Yifretete. So when we say Abodie Santan, we are speaking of like Santan is like a long row of something, and Abodie is creation. So this long row of creation, like basically all of creation. And when we say Yifretete is from, when we say tete, like, some would say the beginning of days, but in Akan thought it's like, we don't really talk about the beginning of days because we were not there. What we say is, tete is like ancient times, like a long, long, long time ago. Also, the next is to say, Obi ntiase onim na shase. So, Obi ntiase is like non-living, onim na shase, knows its beginning. Now, Obi ntinase nkosi na wieye. And none will live to see its end. Gye Nyame, only Nyame. So I go back into the phrases. So the first is like Abodie Santan Yifretete. When we say like all of this creation is from Tete, we can even see it in terms of like the law of conservation of energy, which also states that like energy cannot be created or destroyed. Basically, what is being said is everything that we are, everything we are seeing now, like there is nothing new under the sun. Everything that is now has been since. It's not like any different energy that's coming to, change anything. It's just things that have been there that are coming together to make up, who or what is now. So energy cannot be created from nothing. It's like there's a constant transformation, and we'll see that as we move further. Also, there is the idea of like cosmological like ancestry. So when we see Abodie Santan Yifretete, like, it's like cosmologically we are linked, we are linked to the stars, we are linked to the universe, like we are linked to the beginning of time. So speaking about like cosmological ancestry, you have like scientists talking about, we are all stardust, So also pick this up from one search article, which is like the next time you gaze at stars during an evening stroll, you should spare some companionable thoughts for these glowing balls wandering silently in the vast universe. For you are looking in a sense at your ancestors. Humans, all other living creatures on Earth, and Earth itself are children of the stars. Most of the elements of which we are made, or which allow us to live, which is carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and many others, were created in the stars. Even the fluorine that makes our teeth strong, these were all made up in the stars. So it's like all of these energies that keep, transforming. We die, we degrade, we come back, but not in this form as the symbol is also speaking to, and we'll see that. But the point to be made here is how we have like ancestry to the very beginnings of this universe, and this can be found in, the various stars in the universe. The next line saying that Obi ntiase a onim na shase na Obi ntinase nkosi na wieye. which is like none living knows its beginning, and none will live to see its end. So here to like for us to really, understand the depth of this, we have to go to our Bakongo neighbors, who have like this concept known as the Dikenga. And we learn much about the Dikenga from Nana Fukiao in his book like African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo. But also he has an article in this book, Time in Black Experience, which is like the Bantu Congo concept of time. So the question is like, what is the Dikenga? The Dikenga is basically like a cosmogram which uses the sun to represent, the transformation of all things. So, let's start from Musoni actually. So Musoni is like when the sun is in its midnight position. The fact that the sun is, during midnight, we are not seeing the sun, does not mean that it does not exist. It's still there, we are still feeling its warmth. This same sun will now rise up in the morning to the color position, which is like humans, like we are born, just like the morning sun, we are like feeble, we are not strong. And now the same sun will now move to the Tukula position also, which is when we become like, we enter like maturity. So we become like leaders in our respective fields. And the sun now will go into November, which is also when we become old and gray. And now the sun sets, goes into midnight position again. We are not seeing it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore. So likewise, when we die, it doesn't mean we cease to exist or we are gone. We are there and we transform. This same sun going into the Musoni will now come back into color. And the transformation keeps going on and on and on. So Nana Fukiao in Time in Black Experience says, the Bantu Congo concept of death is very clear. Dying is not the end. We die in order to undergo change. Dying is not only a process, but also a dam of time. As a dam of time, it has its own landmark on the timeline path, and as a process, it permits life to flow and regenerates its power or energy to create a new state of being or undergo transformation, capable of rejoining the body of the universal body energy. The living energy that existed before becoming a living matter at conception is then freed again. So this cycle keeps going on and on. So as we are here in this form, yes, we're here in the very beginning, but not in this form, because we have to undergo change, and we'll keep undergoing change, and this transformation process keeps on, and that's why the symbol here is saying none-living, saw its beginning, because in our current form, we didn't see its beginning. And also none will live to see its end, because, we are going to, change is constant. We are all going to undergo that change. And it ends by saying Gye Nyame. So Gye Nyame, then who or what then is Nyame? And it's a question that I had for a long time. We have like one of the oldest dictionaries, which was done by a missionary. I wouldn't want to give him all of the credits because actually in the preface, he talks about how, he had like lots of locals, bring him information. But in here, Nyame actually, he writes it as the supreme being, the deity, the creator of all things, still doesn't make, actually in the word Nyame, we are getting the root word Nyam, which is like a glorious or shining thing. So in Cree, when we say Owe Nyam, he or she has like a glorious face to say like the person is honorable, like an honorable person. We are speaking to like this glorious like essence. Is it in here? But basically, like speakers of the language will tell that like Nyame, if we have to translate to be like the shining one, the glorious one, So it's like still a question of like, okay, what then is Nyame, like the shining one? What is this shining one? What is this glorious one? And reading Baba J.B. Dankwe's book on Akan concept of God, I mean, it doesn't really help me much. But in the introduction, we had Ija Dixon who mentioned that like most philosophers expound Akan thought in such a way as to make it comprehensible to Western thinkers and to demonstrate that it is comparable to their system. And this was something that's like really unfortunate because, you know, sometimes you'll be reading a text and it's like, yeah, this person gets what Nyame is. Then just a few sentences away, they are like, well, and he is this, and I'm like, nah, but you just said the shining one, the glorious one. Like, why are you now saying he? Or they'll be like, yeah, Nyame, the totality of creation. I'm like, okay, then they'll just say something. I'm like, you know. But many times the problem is like, you know, folks try to compare it to like Western thought and also demonstrate that, oh, you have God, we have Nyame, you know, and so therefore, you know, they are the same. And I mean, personally for me, like, it doesn't suffice. And this tends to be like a problem of like symmetry translation, which Nana Redu actually speaks a lot about in his book, like Cultural Universals and Particulars. But we find some of these like problems in Nana Jechi's book, if you'll permit me to read. So, I mean, he's like, yeah, the well-known artistic symbol, except God, see, Gye Nyame, expresses the idea of the omnipotent, eternity, uniqueness, supremacy of Onyame. Kofi Antobam, the late Ghanaian artist, was given an elaborate interpretation of the symbol by an informant, and he goes into what we've just talked about. But the meaning of the symbol is simply that only Onyame is omnipotent, supreme, eternal. And you know, he goes and he writes like a beautiful line. Onyame is in fact the ultimate reality. I'm like, yeah. Then he goes on, as the uncreated and first cause, he is independent of all the other categories of being. I'm like, but ultimate reality has the feminine inside too. So why he like, you know, then I just, all of a sudden I'm tossed, you know, and we get like this problem, like, you know, it keeps cropping up. So that translation, like, is Nyame equals God, like this becomes like a case of like facile universalism, whereby it's a very shallow way of like saying, you know, because that concept of God exists in European thought in this form, and so therefore it's akin to, you know, all other concepts, you know, in the African world. And it's a very like problematic like statement for me. Especially if you also look at like, you know, the etymology of the word like God, you know, and it's like a word that's like to invoke, you know, to call, to, and if you are familiar with, you know, Akan thought, Nyame is not even invoked, like Nyame is not called, like that's not something we do. You know, Nyame is Nyame, but you don't call Nyame. So you also have like Nana Redu also speaks on the Akan concept of supreme being. I'm not going to go into it for the lack of time, for time's sake. But the interesting thing is that like, even as we speak of like Nyame and Akan thoughts, you realize that, you know, Nyame as a creator principle even has to live within the framework of its own creation. So we have like, you know, an adage that goes like, Oduman kuma bo ma kumno, which is to say like, the great or infinite one created death, and death killed, you know, him or her. No, there is a gender neutral pronoun, so it's encompassing of like all living things. But the idea that, you know, even the creator created death and was killed by its own is like, you know, it has to live within its own laws, within its own, you know, principles. Like it cannot exist outside of it. And interestingly enough, in Akan, to say like the word to exist is like, and I'm sure it's not just Akan thought, but it's like to say to exist is like to place something within a spatial location. So it's like to say something exists, we say ewoho, which is like it is there. And to be there means that there has to be something. Like you cannot just pop up from nowhere and like, okay, where are you? Like, like it just wouldn't make sense, you know. So even Nyame has to live within the framework of like creation. But what I really love about African thought is like, what we don't know, we don't claim to know. Like we're not there at the beginning of time. We will not claim that, oh, in the beginning there was this, and no, we're not there, you know. So as I like delve more, and this is also where I really want like Baba Beatty to help me with, because I realized that now when you start going into like the thoughts of like Kemet or ancient Egypt, you start seeing like, parallels or similarities, and then it starts helping you like get a clear sense. So from this book, which is like the complete gods and goddesses of like Egypt, it speaks of like, Atum, who is characterized here as the sun god, and Atum was like who was sometimes said to have existed within the primeval waters in his air, as a way of explaining the origin of the god. At the moment of creation, Atum was said to have been born out of the primordial flood, as he who came into being by himself, thus becoming the source of all further creation. And I also see this in Nyame, whereby Nyame was at the beginning and then will be at the end. Also, the book speaks of like Atum as the Lord of Totality. So one of the ways in which his name might be translated carries the idea of totality. And in the coffin text and elsewhere, he's specifically called the Lord of Totality. Interestingly, when we speak of like, remember at the proverb that was cited, at the beginning of it, we said Abodia Santai, which is like all of creation. So what is there is like all of creation, and then what is at the end is also all of creation, which is Nyame. So Nyame becomes like the totality of creation. So in this case, and we are all a part of creation, we are not external, we are not away from it. So Nyame is us, like we are Nyame. Nyame is me, Nyame is you, Nyame is like everything and nothing. The potentiality of everything that is to be, everything that has come, and the potentiality of everything that is to be. So our minds cannot even grasp, the depth of Nyame, because we've not, we've only lived, a brief time span or lifespan. So knowing this, I want to invite us once again to think about these one proverbs and Adinkra. So the first is Wubu Koto Kasia Nyame Shewoto, which is like if you fool the crab, Nyame looks at your butt. What do you think is being said? To really like understand this proverb, you would have to have gone crab hunting. If you've not gone crab hunting, But basically, if you've gone like crab, so I mean, when I was a kid, we would go like crab hunting by the stream, and we would find an onion and slice it into half and find like a long stick and put the onion at the edge of the stick. Now you have to go to like where the whole of the crab, bend down and then try to dangle it in front so that the crab can come out, and then try to snap, the onion. And when the crab comes out, you put either a knife or a blade to seal the hole so that it cannot go back. But the point here is that as you bend down to fool the crab, you've exposed your butt. But here, I see it as like, when you do something, and even if nobody is there to see you, the fact that you know of it, means that Nyame is aware of it. Like nobody has to be there. Why? Because you are a part of Nyame, like you're an aspect of this creator principle. The next is Abu Onidria Nyame na Eprano, which is like the animal without tail, Nyame wipes its body for it. Any thoughts? Abu Onidria. Why would we say that? Imagine those dogs without tails, like how do they, what's the idea here?
I'm thinking that like even if you have a quote unquote deformity, like there should be community around you, or at least Nyame is the principle of community around you that fills in the need for that.
Right. So yeah, thanks for that. So basically, like those who lack or those without, if any of us is to be generous, or if anything is to be generous, it's still that creator principle that has done it, because we are all like a part of it. We are all like aspects of it. So if you give to the needy, you give to, like normally people will cite this, in times of like, don't worry, even when you are needy, because Nyame will find a way, and this will be through some somebody, something. Why? Because everything is an aspect of Nyame. And last but not the least, Nyame will not die, therefore I will not die. Any thoughts?
I think it speaks to what you were talking about, how Onyame could be described as the totality of creation. So because we are a part of it, we are a part of Onyame, which is slightly different than other descriptions of the creator, which is as a separate entity than the creation itself. In this conceptualization, the creator and the creation are one system or one unit. Unless the creator or the totality were to disappear, I couldn't disappear. So it speaks to the longevity of spirit and of existence.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, so long as this creation, all of this creation is alive, we are all also not going anywhere. So Nyame will Nyame will not die, therefore I'll not die. So also like the cyclicality of life crops up here. So yeah, looking at this in relation to Kemetic thought actually, whereby it speaks of Atum. So Atum now gives birth to Shu and Tefnut. And out of Shu and Tefnut, we have Geb and Nut, and this actually crops up, I see this and we'll go into that concept also. But I see, parallels also with concept of Nyame. But here, I want to represent it with concentric circles or the Adinkra. So seeing Nyame as the totality of, creation. And inside of this totality, we have the Nyankopon, the deities, Nananum. And inside of this also, we have humans and all living things. But Nyame being, the totality of creation in which we are all a part of. So speaking of Geb and Nut, and you find this in Kemetic thoughts, whereby you have Geb and Nut. So Geb being the principle of the earth, which was actually a masculine principle, and the Nut being the sky, which was a feminine principle, which is very interesting. It's been said that it's only in Kemet that you find this thought. We actually have a similar thought, Irade Nyankopon. And this is also where another problem lies, because now folks will say, yeah, Nyame equals Irade Nyankopon, because it's God and others, a mishmash of everything. And my thought is, if Nyame is Nyankopon, then why is it that in libations, when we pour libations, we call Nyankopon, but we don't call Nyame, if we're indeed speaking of, the same thing. So here, but what I know is that for me to be here right now, my parents had to come together, and for my mom or my dad to be here, their parents also had to come. So we can extrapolate to say that, okay, in the beginning there should have been an original mother and father. And this is where we get Irade Nyankopon. So Irade is that feminine aspect of the creator. Unfortunately, many people say, oh, Irade is God. We have Ira, which is the feminine. Irade, I assume that Ade means then, the feminine thing, and Nyankopon being Nyankron. When we speak of Nyankron, we are speaking of the firmament. So in this case, being the masculine aspect of the creator. So we are having a reverse whereby we are having the masculine being the firmament and then Irade being the earth, or Asase Efua, as we will speak of it. But also here too is dense, because for anything to, quote unquote exist, the sky and the earth have to, they have to be present. Things have to be within that framework of the sky and the earth, So we know that for us to be here also, there has to be an original mother and father. And you find this conceptualized as Irade Nyankopon. I was developing this, but I was scared. Now, what are the implications of the equal to sign? I find something very interesting, when in Nana Redu's cultural universals and particulars. So for him, it's some concepts God, we just have to don't try translating them, just leave them as it is. Like if you want to translate God into Akan, translate God as God. Don't say God is Nyame. And so, for example, he's like an English-speaking Akan might have the impression that the idea is easy to understand in Akan, but this is likely to be because in this matter, he thinks in English and not in Akan. For an African to think in a Western language in this way is a mark of what might be called a colonial mentality. By contrast, he may consciously incorporate his Western acquired concept of electron, which I spoke earlier, as being an empirical object. So, maybe we can have a translation for it or translate it as electron with Akan alphabets. Accordingly, it might be said that while a word like electron is to be introduced to encourage the domestication of certain Western concepts and forms of thinking, a word like God is to be introduced and encourage caution in the assimilation of Western ideas. So for the word like God, he's like, don't try translating that into Nyame, because we have to realize that, if we are going to translate God as Nyame, then there is a problem because we do not have that concept inside of our languages. And sometimes, it's like, okay, you talk to people and then, okay, so what's your idea of God? And then, it comes to a subjective experience. So, okay, this is how I feel about God. And sometimes they may be generous enough to say, yeah, we are speaking of all creation. But the question is how do we know that, our people are also thinking along the same lines? So this was from at the back of a church, right, too. You see God first and you see a picture of this white man, and telling you yeah, this is someone's, this is the idea of God, But that's because we've allowed, we think God is a subjective experience. No, there is conceptual baggage, and sometimes we assume that we're on the same page with people when we are talking about God, but no, we are not. So here, this is where I want to introduce the term aggressive mimicry, borrowing from the plant or the natural, not the natural, but the animal world. So aggressive mimicry is a form of mimicry where predators, parasites, or parasitoids share similar signals with a harmless model, allowing them to avoid being correctly identified by their prey or host. And in this case, I want to introduce conceptual aggressive mimicry, whereby, thoughts or concepts will share similar, signals to avoid identification, and all of this leads to deception. For us to really understand, I want us to watch a short video in the animal world, how this occurs.
I know what's wrong.
Let me fix this.
If you think there's something
No. Okay, let me
fireflies
try stop sharing.
warm summer night, you'd be right. But what you don't see is the dark side of this luminous spider. Firefly flashes are a secret code.
So let me try to fix the sound quickly.
A language of light. The light comes from a masterful bit of chemistry, a bioluminescent reaction that generates light but no heat. So, what are they saying?
Subtitle should be fine, yeah.
Well, males on the wing are advertising themselves to females with a bit of sexy skywriting. Take the common eastern firefly.
Yeah. Share the screen with the Zoom.
Okay, let me try one more time. I'll go back into Zoom.
his signature move? A fishhook-shaped maneuver, which is why this species is sometimes called the Big Dipper. Her reply is more subtle, a single slow pulse from her heart-shaped lantern. Our Big Dipper comes bearing a nuptial gift, a present of more than 200 assorted nutrients, kind of like a box of chocolates. Here's the handoff. Some are lucibuffogens, defensive chemicals fireflies secrete to ward off predators like spiders and birds. These defensive chemicals may help protect her. Firefly codes are so reliable that anyone can speak the language. But we're not the only code breakers listening in. Meet Photurus. She's also a firefly. A larger, stronger one than the Big Dippers. But she has a weakness. Her species can't make its own lucibuffogens. They have fewer defenses against predators. So she sets a trap to get some. She mimics the glow of other firefly females, luring in the males of that species. When Mr. Big Dipper shows up with his chemical gift, she moves in, sucks up those defensive chemicals that she desperately needs, then makes a meal of the rest of it. Most fireflies don't even eat during the few weeks they spend as adults. But he's not totally defenseless. If she's not quick enough, he can secrete a gooey compound that sticks in her jaw and lets him escape. Another gift from the master chemist. Hey there, it's Lauren. I know you see that subscribe button there. Here's what it'll get you. New deep look episodes every...
Right, so that's the concept of like mimicry in the animal world, whereby, folks will dress up to be like what they are not in order to, become or to prey on unsuspecting animals. But I see this also in terms of concepts, whereby we can have concept dressed up as like what they are not, and we're like, okay, we're all talking about the same God, isn't it? But next thing you know, you find yourself in Mecca, and who is reaping or benefiting off all of that. So yeah, I see that, I see similarities as to what's happening here, and therefore propounding the concept of conceptual aggressive mimicry. So what's the relevance of all of it? Definitely we need conceptual clarity, in all endeavors. Yeah, without conceptual clarity, we are going to think, we may be talking about the same thing, but somebody is, pretty much maybe talking about a white boy. Also, very important is not allowing ourselves to be controlled by foreign cultural models. And this is also when we are trapped in, that the sense of conceptual incarceration, whereby we are trapped in foreign cultural models, and then we are being controlled by them, thinking that they are ours or our own. And also it's very important, I feel, to advance our thoughts on independent grounds. A quote I love from Baba Jacob Carruthers, he speaks of the need for African champions to delink African ideas from European ideas, and the need for us to listen to the voice of the ancestors without European interpreters. And I think it's a very important one. And also I think that, as we center our concept also inside of research, that in itself is us centering ourselves in the research process. There's lots of talk these days on decolonization and all of that. And this is a page I really like, Young Level. Decenter this, decenter that. But to be a main character, why not just center yourself? So why don't we center our concept? We have valid, profound concepts in our thoughts. So why not just have the courage to use them? Why are we trying to use, concepts that are not ours or do not speak to our cosmological thoughts? So in that case, this is also like a picture I really love at the back of a taxi, Nyame, which is like Nyame is Nyame. I'm not sure that's what the taxi driver meant, but it's like, yeah, we have to see Nyame as Nyame and Nyame not being God. So with that being said, I welcome like questions and input also.
Thank you very much, Yaw, for this phenomenal, powerful presentation. Can you go back to the slide, cosmological ancestry? Go back to this slide. Right there, you passed it, right there. I teach Egyptian hieroglyphs, but I pay close attention to images. And when I saw this image, I literally saw Gye Nyame. Like the image of the cosmos that literally inspired the sun. I'm wondering, like, do you have any internal kind of cultural sense, like, could this be the observation, the literal observation in nature that they are seeing in order to actually create the image itself?
Right.
That right there, that image right there.
Right. So speaking of that, I know that Nana Jeche speaks of like how we are not an abstract people, but we are people of like, even the language mimics reality. So in that case, I've also been thinking how I don't think that these symbols would be just, would be like taken from anywhere, Personally for me, I also see the connection, which is why I paired it to, but I've not heard like anywhere yet, as to, we were actually referring to, although, I mean, the proverb that works with it actually says so.
Right, I mean, this would be the perfect symbol. I mean, you capture the symbol in the image, in the cosmic image.
But what I intend to do is like, in time to go back to, these communities that are still producing them, to talk to them and then see how, because there is actually occasionally a new symbol crops up. So I really want to also look into like the process of like, how do we come up with like new symbols? I think maybe that would give some knowledge or thought into. But for me too, I really see it. And
When I saw it, I was like, how, in terms of the image itself and in terms of the internal dialogue among the Akan, in terms of Gye Nyame itself, like, in the literature that you've read and people that you've talked to in Ghana, how far back can we see it?
I was to talk about it.
I mean, it's not that it's, it's older than that, but I mean, how far back is it?
So this would be like in the 1870s. So the Adinkra, they speak of them as like, I mean, there is one claim that goes like, it goes back to Islamic like origins. However, that has been discounted because of the technique that's being used to produce like the Arabic scribes will like, write, but in the production of a Adinkra is actually carved into like these blocks of wood and then stamped. So you don't see, the similarity in the production technique there. So that has been one reason used to discount. So aside of that, going back to whenever, many of the origins go back to like the 1870s when the Asantes would defeat the Denchres. And basically it's said that the king of the Denchra was like defeated, was wearing a cloth, that had an Adinkra symbol on it. And from there, that's where the Asantes got it and then incorporated it into Although that too has its own problems, but many of the Genesis goes like around that period, and I've not seen anything go back before. The problem too then is in 1874 there would be like a war whereby the British first defeated the Asantes, and they literally burnt the city of like Kumasi down, took like looted like most of their art, cultural artifacts, and through that. It's even now that they are returning about a few pieces on loan, supposedly. So I see that as like, that was like a point whereby there was historical amnesia, especially in the art world, because back home it's very difficult to go back to like ancient cultural artifacts, because Kumasi, which was like a cultural hub, was literally burnt down at some point, destroyed. Lots of artifacts, or maybe, who knows, maybe a trip to the British Museum might.
The house is stolen. The house is stolen.
Might yield. Yeah, but what I've done being here is I've reached out to the Library of Congress to see what they may have, hopefully that may also open some doors. So the one in charge of like the folk life, she reached back yesterday that she had just gotten back from vacation, and then she was also thinking about Adinkra, so we are looking at like, I'm hoping that they may have something in there that may point to some further direction. So.
Well, I have other questions. I'm just going to ask one more before
Okay.
I open it up. My last question is, of course, I deal with this in terms of Kemet itself, but as a translator, when you come to a situation where concepts are untranslatable in a language, and in your presentation you have a subtle critique of Kwame Gyekye, in terms of this issue. I'm not sure, maybe with Redu, but it's that in the attempt to try to translate this into English, we lose. But my question is that in Ghana itself, can you provide us with a sense of, I don't want to say lit review, but some sense of the diversity within, like not on the terms of English translation, but like a diversity within Ghana itself in terms of the view of Gye Nyame, and the literature that's being used to ground that view, the internal view. Like when you're constructing the internal frame of reference from the Akan, then what is it that's being used in Ghana, and is there diversity within?
Back home, like, honestly, there doesn't seem to be diversity of thought when it comes to Gye Nyame. Like, if you had to ask anybody,
Everybody's
point
got the same.
Yeah, only God, becomes,
yeah.
I think that's become there. Even if you have to speak of Nyame, as a concept, like we try to dig into Nyame, it's like, you realize that you are coming to concepts of like, this God, like this transposition of God onto the concept as now,
But that's how they would explain it in English. How would they explain it in Tree? Like if they're talking amongst themselves, without English as the mediator, how would they explain it?
Right.
Absent English.
Yeah, with that, it's like Nyame we say, I have to think more about that, honestly. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to get to. That's the internal frame of reference. Without the mediator, how would they explain it?
Yeah, but without that frame of reference, I think, what do you call it? One, I think, the proverb itself is an internal frame of reference, speaking to.
Oh, of course.
So that's like one. But in terms of like people talking, personally, and maybe the people I've surrounded myself with tend to be leaning towards, like this. And also the Bible has also been translated into Tree, and then Nyame has been used. So there is like all of that thought as this external being away from us, who is going to judge us like at some point, at some time. you have anything to share on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say one of the differences would also be when you go into more of the rural areas, when you go into more of the very traditional compounds, then you begin to see more of a wider array of kind of perspectives on what Onyame is, right? Like for example, when you're looking at people who deal with like the traditional spiritual system, Akan, you know, as Yaw says, like beyond mentioning Onyame in terms of just recognition of Onyame being the creator of everything, there's almost nothing else that we actually go to Onyame for. Everything else, to the point where we even say that your Onyame, like your personal creator, is the deity that you work with. And so I think that also shows a difference in terms of how we conceptualize the creator, Onyame, inside of this. So when you're talking about Gye Nyame, so this is this large idea of, you know, this entity that created everything, that's in everything, but at the same time, there's also a separate idea where it's like, well, we don't go to that entity for anything because it's everything. Right. You know, like when we first pour in libation, we hold up the water and we say, look, we show this to you, but we don't give it to you because you're the one who created everything, so I give it. Right. I was gonna make a point about your cosmological ancestry that you brought. I think it's very important because in West Africa a lot, but specifically in Akan, as I continue to learn more, there is a very important connection between us and the stars, right? In Soma. It's a very, very important connection to the point where it is said that every person has their own star, right? And whole, you know, spiritual contextualization around it and everything. But this idea that, as you said, like we are directly connected, both physically as being shown here, but spiritually to the cosmos. And so I think your presentation is amazing. But in terms of the differences of Onyame, how you talk about it, if you go more into the rural areas, I think you will see a wider array of conceptualizations of what Onyame is, beyond like kind of what you're talking about, how things have been Christianized. You know,
and that's the oral tradition part. Absolutely. So, in parallel to that, Yaw, is there a written tradition part? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, in the 20th century, like in terms of writing, in terms of diversity, on this concept that's not mediated through English. Is there an internal diversity?
No, that's
in writing.
Yeah, the internal diversity in writing I've found, you know, they are mostly mediated, you know, so our great thoughts scholars, Nana Judges, Nana Redu, yeah, even like
they're calling upon this vibrant kind of oral tradition.
Yeah, you know, yeah, Nana Ntubam, Nana JD Dankwa, you know, they're all relying, but in some ways, you could tell that they are mediating it through, you know, their scholarship in the educational system, you know, and in a way they are like trying to explain, oh, we are humans too because we have Nyame and Nyame equals God. Like I find that, and even when folks are trying to disentangle that, they trap themselves up in like various, you know, gendered specimens that, but I think there's a lot of work to be done. But recently I've been seeing more, the book that, for example, Mama Marimba would be releasing, like you see how she uses Nyame, it's like, oh wow, you know, it really speaks to the soul. And I've been seeing that in like, most of my peers now are also like, you know, starting to think deeply about some of these concepts and trying to understand them without the mediation of like, English,
Other questions? Yes.
Your Honor, beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. So I was thinking, is there a way for you to explain to us, is there an interpretation for the term Adinkra? Is there a word? What does Adinkra means? Literal translation. So you can speak to that. And also to, do you see any difference between the duality of being by the African idea and then dualism as activated in the Western world? I'm asking this question because in Reduce Universal and in particular, it talks about the fact that there are things that are objective. So in as much as they are particularities. There are things that are subjective to a group of people. There are also things that are open, a way that every other society says that is how it looks like.
Right.
So do you strike a difference between duality of being and then dualism? And my final question, okay, let me just do two so that other people can get a chance to it.
I mean, the first one, like duality and dualism, first and foremost, it's important to, what Nana Radio speaks about is cultural universals and particulars. He's not talking about, you know, in general, like, you know, it's, I think the word culture there is like very important. And even if you look at like the quotes I put up, you know, if you have to read further, so he uses the case of like electrons, and he speaks of like electron, he says it's an empirical thing, you know, and so therefore that one we can find ways, because the language allows for us to, you know, like add to our, give names to like empirical things, you know, as and when they come up. So for example, the word for bicycle, daddy a ponko, daddy a metal, ponko horse, a metal horse, you know, because it's an empirical thing, you know, we can see how it behaves, how it functions, and then we give it a name. And he uses like the concept of like God, like, you know, that being a transcendental concept is like something that we should make no mistakes or assumptions about, as saying that this exists in the language, and so therefore we are going to, because we don't know what inside of the framework of our language and thoughts, you know, this is something that's beyond us and we don't know. So let's just leave it as it is. In terms of like duality and dualism, I don't know, I'm really careful though, like what do you mean when you say like dualism, like the Western concept of dualism and, you know, duality, like I'm really, for me, I'm very careful like engaging.
Okay, so you see how you were talking about the fact that the African has a certain connection with nature,
Okay.
and so to the African, he doesn't show any distinction between the physical realm and the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
For the African, the spiritual realm and the physical realm are intertwined, they're interlocked.
Yes.
But that, so that's what I mean by duality of being, or when we talk about duality of being. Is there any form of resemblance in that of the Western idea of dualism? Of dualism? Yeah.
No, not that I know. Even that idea of like, see, that's like folks who say Africans are spiritual beings. Like, what does that even mean? Like, for us, like, I think that what is reality. You know, like reality is what is, and you know, it's at once spiritual, it's at once like material. You know, Nana Radio makes that point. Like, there is nothing spiritual that we do not give a material thing to it. Like it's all one. And I think that we cannot say that, oh, Africans think holistically, and then when it comes to these matters, we like there is material and spiritual. Then that's a contradiction in itself.
Yeah, but I say I was in agreement on that.
Yeah.
The idea that to the African there's no separation between the physical world and the spiritual world.
Yeah.
So I'm asking whether there is that kind of connection in the West.
In the Western.
You see that connection?
I mean, I'm not a Western scholar.
You have to say that.
Yeah, no, truthfully, I'm not a Western scholar. Yeah, I'm an African studies. Yeah.
We can talk about that later.
Okay.
So I also asked about the Adinkra.
Oh yeah. Thanks for that. So actually, Adinkra has, the etymology also has like, there are like different variations to it. The first comes from their like, you know, the king of like German being defeated. His name was Nana Kofi Adinkra. So when he was defeated, the cloth that was found on him had various symbols, and then from there they get like the Adinkra name. Another like thought is that, you know, Adinkra means like, Adinkra means to bid farewell, you know, and one, you know, it's been said to be like mourning clothes, you know, clothes that when we are mourning would wear to bid like somebody like farewell. I find a little bit of a problem with that, because even in Kente, you still find like these symbols in there. You find like Adinkra like on people's houses. You find in various like forms and mediums, you still find it in there. And another thought also is like when Nana Prempeh was being exiled from the Asante Kingdom after the defeat of like the Asantes in 1890s by the British. When he was being exiled, he was given, this cloth, which like, with these like motifs on them as a way of like bidding him farewell to his people. But also what other scholars have said is that he was also given kente. So how come the kente was also not called Adinkra, like bidding farewell, So there are, just to say like there are different, thoughts as to the, like the term, where it comes from, where it originates. But yeah, these are some of the ideas around, as to.
And I was thinking it's very important, especially to what Dr. Beatty said. It's very important for us to know when this word began to be used. Especially, we have to know the origin of it, so that it's very important because we also have to know how it has been influenced by colonialism and westernization. So I think that is the relevance of why you should really dig to find these things out. But the final thing I want to say is, how is this thing relevant to the African diaspora? Why is your presentation on Gye Nyame relevant to the African diaspora, especially when diaspora is part of the African? That is all I have for you.
No, I mean, like I sat in Dr. Beatty's class last week, and he spoke of this like African burial ground in New York.
Yes.
And he spoke of like some folks who had buried had like the Sankofa symbol buried with them, which I think is like very profound. It shows like this connection. It's relevant. I don't think that Adinkra is just like relevant to Akan people. Even the fact that Baba Haile Gerima, has like Sankofa as his cafe was like, me being in DC, so like hearing Sankofa was like, it's like a call, And honestly, I've seen like other cafes here, Bass Boys and Poets and all of that. You can see that the name Sankofa doesn't allow for you to, operate in a certain manner, in a certain way that Bass Boys and Poets would like operate. Else we just go and remove the name, like now we are taking it back. But I think that, like its relevance to global African people, it's like, these are like profound thoughts, profound concepts that are often by us, and it's important that we know them. It's important that we know our cosmological thoughts, because we are connected. We are like and I see, and sometimes I find that the ancestors could have just left us with proverbs, but they are like, nah, these people forget. Let me draw it. I think it's of like, and also just to learn the art of like speaking without speaking, speaking without saying anything, it's like, I think it's very important because whatever be the case, it's still warfare out here. So we have to find like, ways and methods to communicate. But yeah, we'll be
I have a question, but I think to your point in terms of why it's important as well, when you look at the trafficking of African people to enter the diaspora, one of the things you see is that people from Akan land were brought here. And so when you're looking at the metalwork on the various fences, a lot of times we do see Adinkra symbols. Like we see the Sankofa heart, and that's not like a recent, in the last 20 years development. It's something that has been here since, I would say, our enslavement, right? So it's something that has been retained, and so for us to, have that conscious understanding of the various symbols is extremely important. I guess the question I have is, in terms of the utilization of Adinkra today, one, how could we utilize Adinkra actively in like academia, so to speak, right? So there are a lot of concepts that are being actively developed, right, that may not be expressly represented in Adinkra. So is there a process in which we could go through to take some of these concepts to create an Adinkra for them and so on, to actively incorporate it into our, specifically as African people at HBCU, into our active process? And the last question is there any concept that you haven't seen amongst the Adinkra symbol that you would want to see?
So the first, like how we utilize it in academia, we have a class like language and literature, and in this class, like one of our essays, I did writing tree, and I had to like explain a concept of like diglossia. Now, writing in tree allowed for me to like have a conversation. I imagine having a conversation with my grandmother. Like she was the one I was speaking to when I was writing, and I think it was very profound. Like if we are writing in English, I tend to find that would externalize ourselves, like, you know, and they and that. But writing in tree allowed for me to put myself, like there wasn't room for me to, you know, we speak in tree, like there wasn't room for me to externalize. I saw myself in there. But I bring this point because I had to explain the term diglossia, and I had in mind when Anna Radio like talked about that, you know, some concepts you just want to, you know, leave it as they were. But I was like, I mean, in speaking with my grammar, I can't say diglossia and then, you know. So in that, like what I proceeded to do was to like draw it out, like, you know, use symbols to like draw, whereby the process of like there's like a clash of languages, and then, you know, one assumes like a higher position and it's like for like public life, and then one, you know, assumes like an, well, quote unquote inferior status, and it's limited to the private sphere. So I had to, and I drew that with, you know, the division sign, you know, so we have like a circle like above, you know, a line, a circle beneath, and then, you know, depicting that this circle is higher, this one is, and putting in there like concepts like amanyosem, you know, which is like for politics, governance, addition, you know, for education and all of that, whereas ABFA, you know, being home and all of that in there. So in that in itself, I mean, I can liken it to like an Adinkra, you know, like putting things in like a symbol format whereby people could like, you know, understand. For me personally, like in most of my writings, you know, like for my dissertation even, I'm thinking of like how I incorporate like Adinkra symbols, because ultimately I want to be speaking to our people, like, you know. So it pushes me to look for, like, even when somebody is speaking, it's like, okay, what Adinkra would, you know, would like sum this up. You know, we say, because in Tree also we say asempaetia, like a short word is good, you know. So yeah, what would be the symbol that would sum this up? So those are like some ways, and I want to really extend this to like, especially in the sciences, like how do we incorporate, like, you know, because these white folks are doing it, you know, and they are literally calling it Adinkra too, like they didn't even have the decency to, you know, call it Adinkra too. Yeah, so they are doing it. So I think, yeah, like this like we really have to be like active. We have to see like the African universe as like ours, you know, and everything in there belongs to us, you know, like what is in Zulu land belongs to me, you know, what is in Yoruba belongs to me, like what is in wherever belongs to me, and I have to like relate to it, use it, you know, see it as like a birthright. So this, I would say, is an like invitation to like us all, you know, not just like Adinkra, but with our potent signs and symbols, how do we like incorporate them, you know, inside of, how to extend that. And to the point on like an Adinkra that I would like to see, actually one that I personally want to work on is, I keep saying this, just a short phrase I keep saying is Nimdiema Nkwa, you know, knowledge gives life. Yeah, and it's something that I would like to like develop into like an Adinkra. But first I want to find time to go into like these like communities that are still like producing the symbols and find out what the process is like for coming up with a concept, and I think that will like inform, you know, something of that sort. Yeah.
Last question over here. Oh, mine, wow.
Yeah, very dope presentation. Thank you. So, my question is, so when it comes to African cosmologies, I often find that there's a moral principle that is incorporated into the cosmology itself. So the classical example in Kemetic cosmology would be Ma'at, where, what am I trying to say here now? Basically, my question is, and okay, and this is why I was saying what I was saying, or thinking in the direction I was earlier, about basically the mark of a knowledgeable person or a wise person would be the ability to walk in alignment with creation, if Nyame is creation, or the ability to walk in harmony with the world around them. So I'm wondering, is there a moral principle in, or a moral imperative in Akan thought that is associated with Nyame? Can you tell us more about if there is a moral principle and what it is?
Personally for me, the moral in here is, the idea that if you see yourself as like one and a part of everything else, it's like you have, the treatment you give to everything, it will be as you are treating yourself. So if we are to, the thought, and I think of this like the thought that, we are going to die one day, be judged, and then go to a place made of gold, blah, blah, blah. So you go home and you see how folks treat the water, they treat the earth, the land is poison, the waters are poison. When I was growing up, on Thursdays, we're not allowed to go to the stream. And I remember like there was this fear, like it was said that on Thursday, the stream personified itself into a woman who was braiding the child's hair. And if you saw that, you would die. And, I remember as a kid, I was like, yeah, we dare not. Even though we loved going to the stream. I mean, fetching water was like a chore, but just going there just to play, like when there were no adults around, we would just have so much fun. But when the adults came, and then because this was the stream that we were all drinking from, but as kids, it looked like a beach to us. But unfortunately now, when I go back home, like people are literally even building close to it. Like the water is almost gone. Most of the waters are turning yellow. Like mining, the land, so much like chemicals being put in there, because we don't see ourselves as connected to, all of this anymore. And it's really sad, like, it's really, really sad. So yeah, I think that's, the moral statement of it is that you are like a part of everything, and as a result, you had a duty to protect and treat everything as if it were you.
Greetings. I'm sorry I missed most of the presentation, but I'm getting it from the question. So I'm just curious, it might be a simple question. Is there a concrete number of Adinkra symbols? Are they, or can more be created? And if so, who is in charge of that? Like who says this can be created and now we're gonna add this to the language of the Adinkra symbols?
Right.
And where will we find it if there is like a concrete, like maybe 300 or however many there are?
So there's actually a community now in Kumasi, in Tonso, that actually is still actively producing. There's a book known as Cloth as Metaphor, which delves into, like most of the Adinkra symbols. Inside of there, you see like Adinkra symbols like Yesu Asare, which is like Jesus' cross, So it's showing like how like there is one which is literally TV, a television, And in the book actually, the author talks about how someone created, I forget the name, somebody actually created an Adinkra symbol. Yeah, it was a leaf, which is like, I will not eat leaves. But in the story that was told, is like, he made like this Adinkra cloth for somebody to buy. The person came and then did not want to pay for it, but it's like, you can still have it, because the idea is that I will not eat leaves, like I will not get myself into poverty as a result. So even with that, you see like, that there is definitely some addition to the Adinkra process. He also speaks of the book of like somebody from the Menchia Palace, which is the Asante Ines Palace, who is doing research and has been carving his own like Adinkra. Especially, and the symbols I've seen is he's been incorporating other aspects into like the Gye Nyame symbol, and he calls one Onyankopon door. Like Onyankopon and Nyame are like, like, so using a Gye Nyame to encapsulate that, I think was not in the best light. But that's to say that yes, there is an active like process. I know that Dr. Kambon has also like created one ABB found here
Yes.
as well. Yeah, so there is an active like process also, you know, and I don't think that it's to the decision of like, you know, anybody per se. But if you do it and then it catches on, you know, yeah.
But you need to be from that group.
I don't think that's, no, it's not. Yeah, I wouldn't say, yeah. Like, you can literally be here, design something and find some cloth to imprint it in. Yeah, yeah, and now there are, even the market women, they design, they send it to China, you know, China prints like mask, they'll bring it back, and then they give like the cloth a name. So it's like, you know, tradition as it unfolds itself, you know, within like modern times, I'd say.
And when you say design, you mean batik design or different process?
There are different processes. So there is the intiemu, which is like the stamped. So as you are seeing, this was stamped. In Rintoma is like the woven, like the kente, but we are putting the symbols also in there. And then there is the screen printing now, which is like a relatively new method. But now the Chinese are also like ruthless, you know, they come take pictures. So to the point that you have to go, for example, to the art center back home, the folks will be like, when they see Chinese, they don't let them take any pictures. Because they'll just take a picture and the next thing you know, there is like 300 of it, yeah, mass produced. One of our professors was telling me how he was in China, and he's like, they have like a big room of like, you know, machines that are just printing cloth like however number a day, and you know, they come down between us, yeah.
There was a question.
What's up question?
Dr. Cham.
Dr. Cham.
Yeah. So Dr. Cham says, great presentation and profoundly deep analysis that steers clear away from the pitfalls of symmetry that leads to what you rightly characterize as facile universalism. So he says your presentation today and that of Dawit last week reinforce each other, calling attention to African cosmological and epistemic specificities. So well done, Yaw.
Thank you, Dr. Cham.
Thank you, Dr. Cham.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So thank you all also. And that's the same as to
closing comments.
Yeah.
So I mean, closing comments. I think you all have seen. We saw this, and I was going to echo what Dr. Cham said in my closing comments because we have seen this. We saw this a couple of weeks ago with Dawit, and now we're seeing it again with Yaw, and that is the immense power of language to control the interpretation of knowledge. When you have access to that power, you are inside the culture. You can reveal the frame of reference and the concepts in a way that people do not have access to that language, just can't, you know? And with Dawit working on those texts in translation, translating them literally, and what you're doing here in terms of tree, Akan, this is groundbreaking work. This is pioneering work in a lot of ways. And I want to thank Dawit a couple of weeks ago, thank you here, and thank the Department of African Studies for bringing in such brilliant doctoral students and continuing this great legacy at Howard University in this area. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. This was a very interesting seminar. Our seminar series, we conceptualized by Yaw and all of us supporting him, was us wanting to create a space for scholars to come and share their research. If you're working on something interesting, bring it out, share it with everybody, and then you gain greater insights. We've all learned a lot. We have one every 2 weeks, so in 2 weeks there's going to be another one that we will send out the email for. please, if you haven't left your email addresses, please give us your email address so that you are on our mailing list for information. So thank you so much, everybody. This was really good. I know most of them are your students, Yaw. Thank you for coming, and we hope that we see you guys again.
Thank you.